Hi, I'm Pete and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. Well, I have everything I need now to finish up the governor and the hydraulics and put everything back into my 504. I had to collect parts from a bunch of sources. Some came from Case IH or Case New Holland, however the conglomeration works now. I got some parts from Steiner. I got some parts from McMaster Car. I got my carburetor rebuild kit from McDonald Carb that I showed in the last episode. Anyway, everything is here now. I'm not going to be able to do it all in one day, so I'm going to work a little bit this evening, and then I'll put it all together into one video so you can see the reassembly and startup, start to finish. Let's get going. Remember how this throttle linkage hole was egged out and the throttle was really loose? Well, I'm about to drill it out to put a bushing in. What I did was I put a 1/2-inch drill bit, which is the inside diameter of this hole, before it got all worn out. Put it in the drill press, centered it in the hole, and then I built this jig so that it's held centered in the hole. And then I'm going to put a 5/8" drill bit in here and bore this out to a new bushing size. There we go. Next I got to strip down this governor housing, the oil seal. There's a bushing in here, a couple needle bearings all got to come out, and using an old screwdriver as a seal remover, which works pretty well for me. Got to pull this seal out first. Now I usually just collapse them in and then pop them out. Then there's a bushing down in there, which I imagine drives out this way. Well, in any case, the next thing I got to do is drive this soft plug out here, and I got a new soft plug to go in to get at the bearing that's inside. So to do that, I've got a piece of rod here I'm going to put down through, and I'll tap it out. The needle bearings sit right in here underneath where the soft plug was, and I can take and tap that out of there. There's the first needle bearing out. All the needles are gone from in there. Huh. They're all floating around in here. Then driving from the other direction, I can remove the bronze bushing that's down inside. And the reason my rod is so long is I bought this to fix the governor weights with, and I really don't want to cut it shorter. I might need it for something else, you know. There we go. So that's that bronze bushing that was in there. And now we just have one more needle bearing left to get out, which is right in there. Way down in there. I got to get the punch seated on the flange of the bearing. There we go. There it is. Now I can clean this gasket off with the grinder and clean it up in the parts washer and get ready to put the new parts in. I've got the body of the governor all cleaned up, and first thing I'm going to do is I got this bushing from McMaster Car. It's a 1/2-inch ID, 5/8" OD bronze. Fits tight on the throttle shaft that comes in. I'm going to put that bushing into the hole that I bored out with the drill bit and seat it in there. I've got a set of bushing drivers here, and we'll just find the 1/2-inch one. We'll clean this bore out real good with some carburetor cleaner. Nice and clean. Now I'm going to put some red Loctite on this bushing before I put it in so that it locks it in place as much as possible. There's the inside face of that bushing, and there's the outside face. This has got a little ridge on it from the bushing driver because it wasn't quite a tight fit, so I'm just going to take off that ridge with a little curved file. Let's see how this throttle shaft fits. That's good. There's no play at all in there. I'm a happy mechanic. While I'm in the business of driving in bushings, I have a new bushing from Case IH that goes in here to replace the one I took out. And there's a lip down in here that I can drive it to. It floats a little bit, kind of like some seals do, so that I can drive it to a slightly different spot than the old one was, and it can ride on an unworn part of the shaft. And I'm going to drive this one in with a socket that rides near the outside of the bushing because I don't have a bushing driver that's small enough to go in there. That should be good enough. We'll see if the shaft fits in there all right. And it does. Welcome to day 2. It's a little chilly outside, so I turned the heat on. And I'm going to put these needle bearings in next. I got 2 new Case New Holland needle bearings. And these needle bearings are greased, but I'm going to put a little more grease in them so that I'm not sure if the needles will come out of them, but I want an extra insurance that they're not going to fall out while I'm putting them in. Put this one in first. And I'm going to set this in with a socket that's a little bit smaller than the outside diameter of the bearing here. There's that first one. Then I got a soft plug to go in to replace the one that I punched out. That goes right in there. I'll seat that in. Well, I guess I messed up the order on these needle bearings. I really should have driven this one down through the empty hole before I put the needle bearing in this side. Because now I'm going to have to drive it from within the case, which might not be that much fun. These things happen, I guess. I have an idea. Don't know if it'll work, but I have an idea. Suffice it to say, that was not the proper way to do it, but sometimes you got to improvise a little bit, and I'm sure it will be fine. No worries. Let's test fit this shaft in. That's good. All the play's gone from the shaft. I can't wiggle it at all, so we're a long ways ahead of where we were before, and it feels nice and smooth, so I'm good. I'm happy. Now, before I put the shaft in for good, I got to put the seal back in it, and that is a felt here, which I'm just going to grease up a little bit. No need to soak felts like this in oil. You're okay. If it were like a rear main seal, I'd be soaking it, but for this one where you don't see a lot of movement, it'll be just fine. And then here's something else that I messed up, because, you know, we all mess up from time to time. When I pulled the seal out here in the beginning of the video, I didn't realize that it wasn't a lip seal. It's a seal retainer and then a felt inside. So I had to straighten the old seal retainer as best I could. Case New Holland wanted crazy money for one of these, so no big deal. Alrighty, now that we got the shaft on, we can put the forks back on. Just like the carburetor, you got to line up the little screw holes. Only this time I can reach the screws. And that's how that goes together. Boy, it's nice and smooth now, much smoother than it was, and tight. I like that. Next, I have a new governor spring to put on here. And the order on these is important to get them in right. I can hook the bottom of this spring to the butterfly like that, no problem. Now, if I'd put the throttle arm in first, I would not be able to hook the spring to it. So you got to hook this on first. And one of the things, you know, you can check for is this is the hole the spring goes into, and you want to make sure that this hasn't egged out where the spring draws on it. This one surprisingly is in good shape, so I don't need to do anything with that. And the hole on the other side is in good shape too. But before I finish this, I got to put this seal in here. When I ordered these parts from my local dealer, they informed me that they are getting out of Case New Holland International, that line entirely. They're focusing more on Kubotas now. So I won't be able to get parts for them. One of the consequences of it was things that came in packs of more than one and I only needed one, they had to sell me the whole pack because they're not keeping any stock. They're selling off all their stock. So if they had to special order it, I'm getting whatever the quantity is. So I got 2 of these seals. The next time I do a 504 governor, I'll have one already. I think actually when I do the Super C though, it was probably the same seal. They're so similar. This governor is almost exactly the same as the C's, A's, B's, and Super C's. And Super A's. And very interestingly, the guy I spoke to at the dealer said that the reason they're getting out of it is because Case IH New Holland was making them stock too many parts, carry too much stock, and I'm thinking, geez, that's the big problem with what's gone wrong with our supply chain is this kind of stocking on demand thing, having to order in everything, and God, I'd feel better carrying more stock, but you know, it brings down efficiency and monthly profit if you're sitting on stock. It's one of the goofy ways the world works these days. And I shouldn't be blabbering to you, I should be focusing on what I'm doing here. Just driving the seal in, and I didn't do that good a job, but it'll be good enough. It's not like it's buried in oil all the time. Now we can put this shaft in and get the spring all set, and just coating it with grease to lubricate the seal as it goes through it. Slide that in. My new tight bushing. There we go. So I've got the forks, governor spring, and here's the opposing lever that the spring works on. Orientation is important as always, but before you put it on the throttle lever or shaft here, you want to put it on the spring. I'm trying to keep the light here so you can see, and I guess that's really not possible. This goes on this way, and you can work it onto the spring. Now, like this, tilt the whole assembly back and put it right on the throttle shaft. So now I've got this right. This is working the way that it should. I can almost hear the tractor revving. Then we got a washer to go on that shaft, and a lock washer, star lock washer, and a nut. Fit down in there. There. And there's the inside of the governor. All put back together. There's the throttle arm. Everything fits the way that it should. The only thing we got left to put in here is the bumper spring down on the bottom. I have a new bumper spring here, and this is the receiver and the acorn nut that the bumper spring goes into. I'm going to leave it where it was set before, and I assume that's going to be darn close, if not right on where it needs to be, so we'll just reinstall it same way. I'll use a dab of grease to hold this spring in the receiver because I'm holding it upside down here. There we go. And there's that bumper spring way down in the bottom there. You can see it contact. See how it contacts right there. It's like a shock absorber. Dampens the fluctuation back and forth in the governor. Now that I've got the governor back together, it's time for the job that I've been putting off, frankly. I've got to get back into this. And remember, let me get you in here. This bushing in here needs to be replaced. It's cracked right across here, which is weird, but I've got to get it out of there. I've got to turn the camshaft timing gear around to get the double punch marks onto the governor and distributor drive gear, and probably to replace this bushing I got to take the ignition assembly off here, distributor drive, disconnect all this so I can get in here to drive this out and put the new one in. It doesn't seem very important to me to line up the timing marks on the camshaft gear and the distributor drive gear because I have a battery ignition unit and I can turn that whichever way to get the engine timed properly. But I figure since I've got it apart, you know, I like to do things right as much as I can, and so I'm going to line up those timing marks. These jobs that we put off, they usually aren't as bad as we make them out to be once we get into them. I'm just going to pull these plug wires off to get this out of here. Remember, ignition issues were the last part of the job for me, and I've been thinking about how best to address that. I'll talk about that a little later. Oh, we got to disconnect the resistor here. Disconnect the resistor bypass here. Disconnect the tach drive cable, and then we can just pull the whole assembly out. Take that off. There we go. Everything is disconnected now. Now we'll just pull the distributor drive off. With the distributor, it's still attached. Just 2 bolts here. There we go. Now I've got access to both sides of that bushing in there, so I'll be able to pull it out and push a new one in. I keep some old screwdrivers around that I sharpen up real sharp, and then I can use them for things like this, and I think if I just cave a little bit of it, I can pop it out that way. Because I don't have a bushing driver that is nearly large enough for this. What I did is I caved it in until it was loose enough to just slide out. Here's the new bushing. I put a light coat of oil on the outside of it to help a little bit. It's got tapered ends on it, which helps it drive too. And it's got one of these cool puzzle keyways in it, which I always think that they're really cool the way they put them together. To seat this bushing in, what I did is I cut a piece of hickory that fits right in there, and then I can drive against that and drive it in. This seems to be the best thing. I tried a rubber hammer and a dead blow, and I'm not real comfortable with any of them, but a piece of hickory I know won't hurt the bushing. I gotta drop the light 97 more times. Before I put this governor distributor timing gear in, I want to show you the pins, remember here, were worn. Well, it turns out they're 1/4 inch. So I just went and bought a piece of 1/4 inch round stock, cut it to length, and then I had to drill a hole in for the cotter pin to go through, and it was easy as that. Didn't cost me only but a couple of dollars. So now I'm ready to put this in. Let me bring you guys in here, and there's the new bushing that I pressed in there, and I cleaned up the gasket surface, and now we can go ahead and put the drive gear back in. And I really don't have a good way to bring you guys in while I'm doing it, so you're going to have to watch from over there. There we go. I decided that it is too difficult to line up the timing marks because I can't even see them on the other side of the gear. So it doesn't really matter because I can turn the distributor gear whichever way I want. It'd be a different story if I was putting a magneto on because it's got to line up with the tangs in the right way. Put this little spring and pin in here. This is kind of the thrust mechanism for the governor gear. Grease this shaft up. And slide this spacer on here, this plastic spacer. And then I have here a new 3-piece thrust bearing that I'm going to grease up before I slide it on. This all runs with oil spraying all over it, but for the first startup, you know, you just want to get some grease on these things. There. That slides right. Okay. And I put the gasket on this governor housing and I coated it with Make a Gasket or whatever it's called. The Permatex product that I use, because this timing cover is just tin. It's, well, 96 more times for the lamp. This timing cover is just sheet metal. It's not cast like a lot of Farmall engines are, and it flexes a little bit. I've had trouble using regular gasket makers, so I use this thicker stuff on it. All right, we gotta get her in here. There we go. Working by feel here. We'll put this breather pipe back on. And I can hook this linkage back up on this side of the governor. And don't forget the cotter pin in the shaft. And on this side of the engine, we can go ahead and install the carburetor. I put the governor linkage onto the carburetor before I put it in because it's a lot easier to get the cotter pin in that way. And afterwards, get that lined up. Oh, 86 more times. I don't know, does that count as a drop? Or a fall on the floor? We can go ahead and hook up the intake here. Tighten up the hose clamps. Hook the choke cable back up. We know where it's got to sit because it's got a kink in it. There we go. Good deal. She needs some lubrication though. We can hook up the fuel line. Turn that in. There. And lastly, I got to reach back in here and hook the linkage from the governor to the carburetor. I can feel spring pressure on that whenever I move it, which is a lot better than what it was. I like it. See how it returns? Didn't do that before. With the governor and the carburetor all set, it's time to start rebuilding these hydraulic pistons, these spools that go in the hydraulic valves. And I've got all the parts here, and so we're going to reassemble them. They're a little bit fussy about how they get reassembled. So I've cleaned everything up here. And the first step is I got to take this O-ring off of this detent assembly here and put a new O-ring on it. And I always like to dip these in a little oil before I put them on. Very detailed work with these guys, just like the carburetor. Put that on. Then I have new pistons. Remember, the pressure on the piston is what actuates or releases the detent on the hydraulic valves. And there's the little piston. And it goes in here like this. We're going to oil things up first, though. And having seated that piston way in here that I can see with the light, I just want to push it back and forth a little bit and make sure I get smooth motion out of it. It's a tight squeeze because it's got a lot of hydraulic pressure working on it. Yep, there it goes. Now I can put this assembly together, and I made sure when I cleaned it that I blew through here and that I had fluid running out through all four of these little teeny holes here, because that's the pressure system that works that piston that I just put in. We've got a washer, and we've got our spring holder, and then we've got this. We got to push down on the whole thing and screw it in. And I'm just going to tighten that down a hair with a pipe wrench over a shirt. Doesn't need to be King Kong tight. Next we have to put the little balls in, and it's a trick getting them to stay in until they go in the detent sleeve, which is this thing that rides over here. So what I do is I put a little grease on them to have them stay stuck in there. So I've got 3 balls, and there's 2 smaller ones that go on the outside here. Pop that one in. And I've got this other guy here. Come on, you. I got those 2 guys in. Now, the larger ball goes down the hole here, and that's followed by this little washer to keep the ball centered on the spring. You gotta make sure you get everything in here right. And then the spring goes in last. And then this plug, which puts compression on the spring, goes on. And we don't want to turn that down too much yet. Just turn that down enough to have it stay in. And then we make sure we've got both of these steel balls in here. And then we can put a little oil on this collar and slide it on like that. And then find the right O-ring that goes on there. Slide that O-ring on. And that goes way back here. And that'll be seated when we screw the valve into the valve body. Now, having gotten this one spool together, I'm going to do the other one, and I'm going to leave this one out of the tractor until I get finished with the other one, because I use one or the other as a pattern to make sure everything goes together right before I put them back in. So I'll clean up this one next, and then I'll get back with you when we put them in the tractor. Interestingly, when I pulled the second valve apart in the detent assembly that goes up here, the screw plug was locked in tight. I had to heat it up with a torch to get the plug out, and the plug's been messed with before. Somebody tried to crank it way in tight, and the reason they did that is because the spring had broke inside on it, and they were trying to get the detents to work. The detents never worked in this valve, and that's why. And it is really cruddy. All the balls are crudded up, and so not having a new spring on hand, I have a salvaged valve on hand. It came out of the 656 junker that's out in the yard, and fortunately these have the same valve parts as the 504, so I can take the plug and the spring and maybe the balls out of this too if they're in better shape and put them back into it. I have both the valve spools reassembled now, and the next step is to put new O-rings in the front here. I pulled the old ones out and cleaned everything up. I oiled them up and I'll work them into the groove here. There's one. There's two. And I lubricated up these assembled valve spools. I got the rear detent assembly already on them to put in as a unit. And we just slide it in the bore. These should be a tight fit. That's the intention. And I almost forgot, I want to leave the plug out of this end cap so that I can adjust the detent after I get the tractor running again. Doesn't need to be super tight because the O-ring is making the seal. There, we can hook this lever up to the front of it and see how it feels. It's not hanging in the detent, so we'll do a little preliminary adjustment to get it to stick there, at least when the tractor's off. That'll all change when the hydraulic system is pressurized, but we'll set it preliminarily. Now we know that the steel balls aren't engaging, so the spring needs more pressure on it, so I'm just going to turn the little plug in here to put some more pressure on the spring. So I've messed around and adjusted it, and again, this is going to change when the hydraulic system's got pressure on it, but this is a 4-position valve, so I've got raise, and now it's in the detent for raise. Neutral is the 2nd position. Downforce is the 3rd position. And float is the 4th position. So 4 positions. We can go ahead and put the cotter pin on this and we'll be done with that side. And now it's all back together, and here's the other side. This is a 4-position valve as well. It's a little bit sticky in the raised position, but again, you gotta wait till it's running to final adjust it. It feels a heck of a lot better than it did. Now the other thing that can happen with these valves that can make them sticky is there's 3 bolts that hold the stack together here on the end, and they need to be torqued. I think it's 35 foot-pounds. It's not a lot, I can't remember exactly, but if you don't torque them all equally, surprisingly it'll warp these valve bodies a little bit and cause the spools to jam up. So you want to make sure that they're tightened down correctly, and certainly not too much. Feels a lot better. And this is the end of part 1 of reassembling this tractor. If you follow the other videos on the channel, you know that I ran into a world of hurt right after I finished doing this, when I got into the distributor and actually started the tractor up. And I'm going to cover that in part 2, the problem as well as how I fix it. And that video will be coming out tomorrow. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.